All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We are doing Chapter 8, the exercises 1 and 2 for this practice assignment. However, again, as I've been doing, I'm only going to do one of the exercises per video. So we will start with exercise 8-1 here. And if you look at my screen, you should notice that I have the invoice total application up. Again, just to kind of consistently remind you, I am building my own throughout the term and not using the example code that is given in the author's materials. So mine is going to look different probably than if you opened up your own application from the author's materials. So yours probably won't have the information over here on the right. There's going to be some differences in the information here, but at the end of the day, the stuff that I'm doing is still going to be the exact same stuff that he's doing in the text, and none of this additional information is going to change anything. So we're just going to get going with that. Again, we're making no changes to the form itself. Our form is pretty well set up how we want it to at this point. So we're just going to go in here and we're going to make some code. All right, so the author says to declare 2 class variables, an array that can hold up to 5 invoice totals, and an index that we can use to work with that array. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take our set of class variables that we have here. Remember, the class variables are variables that are defined under this class header and not within any of the other methods, so they can be used by the entire class here. And we're going to create a decimal array that I'm just going to call invoices. And we're going to allow this to be set to a new decimal array that can hold 5 values. And then we're going to have an integer. Indexes are always as an integer. And we'll just call this invoice index, and we will assign it an initial value of 0. Now when we load this form every time, it's going to create this new array, and it's going to create this new invoice index. So those will always be 0 as long as those will always be set up the way that they are when we start the application. Now we're going to add some code that's going to add the invoice total to the next element in the array each time the user clicks the calculate button. So we have our calculate button click method here, and what we want to do is we want to add this code of the invoice total to the array, and we get our invoice total here. So anytime after this statement here, we can go ahead and add that. I'll go ahead and I'll add it right away. So we're going to say invoices at, is that right? Yeah, invoices at the index of invoice index is assigned the value of that invoice total. So what's happening here is when we work with arrays, we work with a variable name that names the array, and we work with an index. This index starts at 0, which is the first element in our array, and we're going to say invoice at the index of 0 is assigned the value of whatever our invoice total is. And then after we do that, we need to increase invoice total by 1. So the next time that we hit this button calculate method, we're going to have a new invoice total value. So the next time it's going to be at invoices at the index of 1 is going to have that value, and then it's going to increment that value again, and so on and so forth. So that should be enough to build our array. And now we're going to add code that displays all of the invoice totals in the array in a message box when the user clicks the exit button. To do that, we're going to use a for each loop to loop through the totals and format that message into the message box. So we have our button exit here. Before we close the application, we want to create a message box that's going to contain all of those things. And probably the easiest way to go about doing this would be to go ahead and create a string. We'll call it message. That's just going to be an empty string. And then we're going to say for each. These are decimals. And normally I would say invoice like that. In invoices. Now, the naming of invoice here is completely arbitrary. I'm only doing that because my array had a plural of invoices, so I want to check for each invoice. Again, this could be, whoops, you could name this Dave, and it would work just fine. I just use invoice because it makes sense for what I'm trying to do here. And then it says I want to go ahead and go through this loop and include an if statement that only displays the totals if they're not equal to 0. Because when we first create this array, it's going to give us an array of 5 zeros. So if we only fill, say, 3 invoices, there's going to be 2 zeros in there, and we don't want that. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and eliminate the zeros because we're not going to have any 0 invoices. So what we can do is we can say if invoice is 0, and remember it's a decimal, so I'm going to say 0m. And actually what I want is if it's not 0, so we need to do it that way. I'll explain that in just a minute. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put in the value. And then display a message box with the message. So what I've done here is I have my invoice is equal to 0m, or 0 as a decimal. And then I want this to happen when that doesn't happen, so I put this not in front of it. The not was tying itself to the invoice and not the invoice is equal to 0m. So what I had to do is I had to enclose invoice is equal to 0m in a set of parentheses, which is going to give me a true-false statement, and then I applied the not to that. I could have also done if invoice is not equal to 0m, then I do this. Either way would work just fine. The way that my brain just works, this actually makes more sense to me, but you're fine to do it either way. The other way probably makes more sense to most people. But I only want to add this string here if the invoice is not 0. I could have also said if the invoice is greater than or equal to greater than 0 to add this, because I don't want a negative invoice, which I can't have. But this would show me that I couldn't have a negative invoice I wouldn't add a 0 invoice if I say if invoice is greater than 0, then add the message. So there's a number of different ways that you can go about doing this. None of them are wrong. Just however you want to do it, whatever makes the most sense to you. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to try this out real quick. I'm just going to make sure everything works just fine. So we're going to, I don't need to enter a customer type, or you shouldn't need to enter a customer type. That's just because I'm still using this older format, but we're going to add $100. Let's add $250, and we'll add $50. Calculate all those together. Now when I hit exit, I should see a message box that has 3 values in it, and I only have 1. So now I'm going to have to go back and try and figure out why that happened. So give me a pause for a minute here, and I will come back and I'll explain what I found. Alright, I found my issue. When I was up here, I incremented the invoice total, And what I wanted to do is increment the invoice index. That's my fault. I'm sorry if I confused you with that. But yes, that's what we're going to do, is we're going to increment the invoice index, and that way the next time that we run this, the index will be the next higher number. And now that I have that, this should all work now. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to do a customer type R, and do $50, $150, and $100. And now, whenever I hit exit, I should see those 3 invoices. And there they are. We could add a quick thing on here, so we can just say this is my invoice array. And that way, when we display this, now we have a little message there that tells us what it is. Okay, so that is how we're going to work with arrays. Another thing that it wants us to do is to check for the index out of range exception. So if I go in here and I run this, and I say, we'll just say 100, calculate 150, 200, 50, and 95. That gives us 5 elements in our array, which we could see if I hit exit now. But if I don't hit exit right now and I want to add another array, because as you see I now have 5, our array only holds 5. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and add another one, and then I get this weird message that pops up. The reason why I get this weird message that pops up is because we have our exception handling here, and this general exception message got caught, and it says warning, and all I'm doing is displaying the exception to string, and that can be kind of a confusing mess if we don't know what we're talking about. So I've just done basically a little bit of debugging on this, because I tried to add the index out of range. Basically means that I have tried to add information to an array that's already full, and you can't do that. So what I want to do now is I don't want to display that message to my end user. I want to go ahead and I want to catch an index out of range exception, and then I can have that index out of range exception do whatever is needed. Pardon me. So I can say a message box show. I can say whatever error message I want. I can say something like the you can only add up to 5 invoices, and then the title will say too many invoices. So now I have caught the specific exception that I received, and let me just go ahead and comment that out real quick, just so I can kind of show you where I get this information. So we're just going to go ahead and add in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the first thing that pops up is it says system index out of range exception. Index was outside the bounds of the array and it tells me where that error message is. So this first line here tells me exactly what kind of exception I want to catch. So I can go ahead and I can remove that there and place it back there. I'm going to catch this specific exception of the index out of range exception. So now whenever I go back and run it, again, we'll say R1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whenever I go to add 6, instead of it saying index out of range exception, it's going to come up with this specific thing that I said. Too many invoices, you can only add up to 5 invoices. And then notice that because it caught an exception, it ended the rest of the program, and my number of invoices was the same. The total of invoices, the average invoice, the largest invoice, the smallest invoice, those are all the same as before the time I tried to enter that. Now the last thing that it asks us to do is to go through and do the exact same thing, only using a list instead of an array. Let me just see this real quick. Oh, we actually need to sort the index totals. So we can come down here, and what we can do is we're going to create a copy of the array so we can sort it. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to create another array, and it's going to be the sorted array. Oops, that's not how we create an array. Do it like that. Is assigned a new decimal that's also going to hold up to 5. And then I just want to, for int I 0, I is less than invoices dot length I plus plus. And then all I want to do is I want to say sorted at I is assigned the value of invoices at I. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my invoices. Let's just stick with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because that's easier. Invoices at the index of I starts at 0. So invoices at the index of I is 1. We're going to assign that value to sorted at the index of I, and then so on and so forth. And then we want to go ahead and sort that array. So now what you might be asking yourself is, why did I go ahead and create this copy of an array, and didn't the text say that there's another way to do it? Answer to the first question is, when we sort an array, we alter the original array. And I don't like doing that. I like keeping the original array the way that it was. And then we can sort a copy of that array and return and use that. However, if you want to just go ahead and sort your original array, because it doesn't matter, that's fine with you, fine with me. The answer to the second question is yes, the text does go over a different way. So what we're going to do is we're going to say array dot copy, and then we take the source array, which is invoices, the destination array, which is sorted, and the length, which is 5. And that also copies our array element by element. So however you want to create your copy of an array is fine. And honestly, for this particular example, you probably don't even really need to create a copy. But I think it's a good habit to get into, having a copy of an array if you're going to have code that alters the array's order in any way. So we'll copy the array, we'll create a new one, and then we're going to say, instead of invoices, we're going to say sorted. We can still use the invoices here, or the invoice here, because, again, that variable name doesn't matter. But we're going to go through the sorted list and display the sorted array instead of the original array. And then we just want to sort the array by saying array dot sort sorted, and that will sort our array. So now when we run this, we'll go backwards this time. We'll say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then we're going to go ahead and exit. And it did sort our array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's how we're going to sort our arrays. That's how we're going to work with our arrays. The last thing that we want to do real quick is to use a list. Now, list is a really, really easy way, in my opinion, to do this, and I actually prefer to use lists over arrays in C#, but I think it's important to understand how to use arrays properly because there are other languages, if you ever get into any of them, that don't have lists as a data type, and you need to know how to work with arrays instead. So to create my list, I'm just going to create a list, and in the angle brackets, I'm going to put decimal, and I'm going to call this invoice list. And that's a new list. And the thing I like about list is, or one of the things I like about list is you do not have to you do not have to tell it how many elements you want. You can, but even within that, you can alter that size dynamically throughout your program. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to come down here where we added our elements to our array, and we're just going to add invoice list, add, and I want to add the invoice total that we had before, and that's it. That's all I need to do to create my, to add the elements to my list. If I did not have this invoice array here, I could add theoretically an infinite number of elements to my list, and it would just keep growing. And then it wants me to add a second for each loop down here to display the elements of the list. So we're just going to say for each decimal, I can use invoice again in invoice list and do it the same way I did before. Oops, 0. I'm going to say message. We'll do string list message. That way we get a different message for each one. I'm going to say list message is string format. New line. Invoice. Oops, forgot to end my thing. Invoice. And that should be that. Then I'm going to go ahead and do a message box show. I want a list message. And this is going to be the list display. Now I did not sort my list. I could have. I did not sort my list. So as I go through and enter these now, we'll go ahead and do that. We'll say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then whenever I exit, the first thing I should see is my display of the sorted list that says invoice array. And then the next one is going to say list display, and it should not be sorted. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is my sorted array. And then the next one is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is the order in which I entered them. Now, of course, it being a list, just like anything else, I could go through and I could sort it the same way. I think I do that with, it's been a while since I've done this, invoice list sort. And that will sort the list. So now whenever I do this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and exit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the invoice array, and the list display is also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because I sorted that list. Now again, normally if I wasn't just doing this as quick demonstration, I would create a copy of the list and I would use that copy to sort, but for the sake of time here, I'm just going to do it this way just to kind of show you. And that is pretty much it for this particular exercise. I hope everything kind of made sense to you. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I will do exercise 8-2 in my next video.